What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Steelers Breakdown Podcast. Nick Farabaugh here with you guys, and I have a guest that was here with us not too long ago, Kevin Fielder. Kevin, welcome to the show, man. You were here talking small school prospects last time. You're also a Dolphins fan, though, so with the Steelers Dolphins blockbuster deal, this felt like a perfect time to have you back on.
Yeah, I mean, something happened over the week that feels important to talk about. I don't know. I mean, feels generally important to talk about a trade like that.
It does. It does. For context, folks, I got home at like 3:30 a.m. and then they traded for Jalen Ramsey. So I mean, it was great. My vacation ended, and then they were like, boom, back into it. What an insane offseason this has been for Pittsburgh between DK Metcalf, Pickens, Rodgers, and now this trade. So let's talk about this. Jalen Ramsey with the Steelers. Now, from what I know, Kevin, the Steelers plan to play Jalen Ramsey all over the place. They're going to play him outside. They're going to play him in the slot. We're going to see some safety. We're going to see some dime backer. We're going to see him be this like versatile chess piece neutralizer of like big weapons. Talk to me about where Ramsey's game is at age 30. I think we all know how good he was in LA. We all know how good he was in Jacksonville. But I feel like a lot of eyes maybe haven't been on him as much when he went to Miami. Just because I haven't heard a lot about Jalen Ramsey, but you look at the stats, looks good still. But how's the tape look? And for you as a guy, do you think he's best now as a slot safety type, or can he still play outside most of the time?
Yeah, I mean, this is not the same Jalen Ramsey that we saw in LA. And it's largely just because of injuries and health and age, right? Like as you get older, you naturally are not the same player. That's not to say he's not effective. I think that if he had stayed in Miami this year, he would have been one of the better corners in football, and he would have been the most important piece to Miami's defense. The thing is, he wanted out. He wanted to get paid. Miami was a little bit more hesitant to do that with his age and some of his injury history. But this is still an incredibly talented player. His ball skills are still at the top of its game. He's made a lot of impressive pass breakups and interceptions in Miami. The biggest issue now is when he's guarding some of these younger wide receivers, especially deep in man coverage, he gets burned. And I think that's just naturally as you get older, right? And these guys, they're not getting any slower. And I remember there was a play against, I think, Arizona this year where Marvin Harrison just burned him deep. And it was like not even close. It wasn't even a competition. And you're going to get those moments with Jalen Ramsey, which is why I think probably moving him into the slot, moving him into a safety star role, I think that's probably the best place for him now. I think that's where you minimize some of those things. You give him the best opportunity to be a productive player. I mean, this is still a top, probably 10 cornerback in football. I don't know if he's top three like he was a few years ago, if he's the best. He's certainly not the best cornerback in football, but for a team like Pittsburgh who needs cornerback depth, I mean, this makes a ton of sense. They get a starting corner, they get a starting versatile chess piece. And for Miami, it's an opportunity for them to reset, and it's an opportunity for them to get younger and see if some of their younger players who for to some degree they're fans of can take over that role. But for Jalen Ramsey, I mean, if you're playing him in the star safety slot kind of versatile role, I think that minimizes some of those age concerns and allows him to play another 3 or 4 years at a high level.
I think that's where he's going to slot in. He's a big dude. I saw on tape a lot more blitzing last year from him than I thought I'd seen in the past from him. Steelers love to blitz their slot corners. Didn't do it a lot last year because they didn't trust their guys there. They're going to, I think, use him in this versatile role. As you mentioned, the star role that he played in LA. I think that's what he's going to play here. He'll play a little bit outside, but the Steelers do have Darius Slay and Joey Porter Jr. That they can have out there if needed. Here's the interesting thing I think about because Ramsey's contract is long enough to if the Steelers want to, they can have him through, 33, 34 each season if they really wanted to do that. It's not hard to extend this deal. It's not hard to do that. For you, and I don't know if I believe in 2021 he mentioned that he would move to safety full time, like full on, for the Steelers, Rod Woodson style, where he went from corner for his first 12 years and then went full time safety and became an all pro safety. How much of that do you see in his game? Like, how much do you think his game translates not to the slot, but safety? This is down the line, not this year. He'll play a little bit of safety this year, but I'm talking, when Jalen's 33 and maybe the speed's just not there anymore. Does this look like a player to you in terms of his run support, his blitz ability, his coverage instincts, all of that that could be a legitimately good safety even late into his career?
Yeah, and that's something Anthony Weaver kind of toyed with this year in terms of being able to use that a little bit more, and it was effective. Like Jalen Ramsey was an effective blitzer. He was effective in run defense. He did those little things well, and they didn't always stand up on tape. And I think a lot of Dolphins fans were probably frustrated with the production they thought they got out of him, and they thought they probably could have gotten more out of him. But if you're moving him to like a box safety role, I think it works. And I think that is probably the best way to maximize the last few years of his career. And instead of maybe getting 1 or 2 years out of him, maybe you get to steal an extra year or two at the back end of that and give him an opportunity to play it. And I think that was probably the plan in Miami regardless. I think, at some point the plan was to move him to safety, move him to, just a position where he's not going to be facing the top cornerbacks anymore. The issue is that Miami just didn't have anyone else to play those roles initially, and so he had to still play as the outside corner. But they certainly experimented with it a little bit more last year, and I think it worked. And now I think you'll see in Pittsburgh where you have Slay, you have Porter, right? Like you have other guys, and so he doesn't have to play outside, and you can sort of let him ease that transition to safety in a smoother way than I think Miami had the opportunity to do.
Yeah, and so I think that's going to be a big part of it. I think he's going to play most of his snaps in the slot. That's where I think he's going to live this year. Steelers need a slot corner so bad. And I want to talk about that kind of just impact of slot corners. I know that he couldn't necessarily become a full-time slot because of Kadir Koho. Is it Koho?
Cater Kohu.
Cater Kohu, that's what it is. He's in the slot there for you, for Miami down there. And so I knew he wasn't a full-time slot there. The Steelers don't have a slot corner inside of Beanie Bishop really right now, who was benched for Cam Sutton, who was just atrocious last year. So Beanie's a fine backup, but they needed a slot. So this is a guy that I think could be, when you talk about Ramsey's impact, I think can be one of the best slot corners in football. I truly believe that. I don't think he's going to have a similar impact to, let's say, Brian Branch. I think that's a different type of slot corner. But can he have a similar impact that Marlon Humphrey has? That's kind of who I look at, or even Trent McDuffie, who kind of plays outside, inside, goes a little bit all over the place. Do you see Jalen Ramsey? Who will probably play outside slot and a little bit of dime back or safety. He'll play a little bit of everything, but maybe sit in that slot most of the time when he's in these kind of sub packages, these nickel and dime looks. Do you feel like he can be a super game changer for you at slot corner? Just thinking about what you can do with disguises, thinking about how you can blitz out of looks, and just the flexibility you get as a defensive backfield with a guy like that in the slot. Can he have an impact like those great slot cornerbacks I just named that also can play outside and elsewhere?
I think he can, and I think that is where you get the most out of him right now. And I think the large reason for that is he's still athletic enough to guard a lot of the slot receivers in football. He still has elite ball skills that help him create big plays for the defense. He's shown that he can blitz. He's shown that he's aggressive in run defense. Like when I look at what a modern day slot cornerback looks like for a team trying to elevate their defense, those are the traits I look at, right? And I go, okay, well, can he run defend? Can he blitz? Can he be versatile? Jalen Ramsey to me still fits all those things. And like again, I feel like it's constantly needed to be mentioned. He's not the same player he was in LA or even that first year in Miami, but he's still incredibly productive. He's not aging rapidly to the sense of like it's going to be ugly this year, but like I think that if you put him in the slot, you hide some of those athletic concerns initially. You get him, you don't have him play against the super athletic receivers in the division or even, on their schedule. And it allows him to just be productive and it allows him to move around and you play him in certain ways. And I think for a defense like that, that's so much more important than having a guy who can just play outside corner. And especially when you look at sort of what they dealt in this deal with Minkah Fitzpatrick, right? Like I think you probably get back a little bit more of that versatility, a little bit more of that ability to make plays, and you get a guy who can play outside corner. So if Darius Slay struggles or gets hurt, or if Joey Porter struggles or gets hurt, right? Like you're not completely worried about having to get a guy who can play outside corner. And I think that's the biggest thing right now is with his versatility, the defense opens up a lot more avenues to confuse an offense long term, which should help the defense with the amount of pass rush depth that they have.
It should. I mean, this should be one of the best defenses in football. It really should be. And they kind of traded more impact into the line of scrimmage for less impact in the post area, the deep area of the field. The Steelers play so much cover three and cover one. They're kind of an outlier in this league that is all on vogue in terms of split field coverages and two high shells, quarters, quarter, half, different things like that. The Steelers run those, but not nearly as much as anyone else. They still stick to their traditional cover three, cover one looks and kind of let that guy roam back there. But what it meant for the Steelers is Minkah didn't make a lot of plays, and his splash play potential just wasn't maximized, and some of that was injuries. Minka's definitely not the same player he was at his all-pro peak. He's lost a little bit of steps there. And so with Ramsey, they actually get more impact at the line of scrimmage and more impact over the field, and they're going to have more splash play potential. Minka's still a very good player, but I think for what the Steelers needed, Ramsey fits it more. And so that's why I think that move was made. We'll see what they do at safety. They need another one. I do not trust Juan Thornhill to be the starting.
I don't think anyone does.
Right. And behind him, they don't really have a natural free safety. They need another one regardless, just for depth. Sebastian Castro, we talked about him, but he's more of a box safety. You have Deshaun Elliott, obviously, who I think unbelievable year last year, got his new extension. You feel good about, but they need someone else. Julian Blackman's out there. I'd probably go out and sign him if the shoulder's good. But I want to flip now to the other side of the football because the Steelers got two players in this deal. They got Jonnu Smith too. Is anyone surprised that Arthur Smith traded for Jonnu Smith? No one is.
Couldn't help himself. Just couldn't help himself.
He couldn't. Jonnu's here, Cordero's here, Michael Pruitt came through last year, Scotty Miller, Van Jefferson. I mean, the Arthur Smith connects are just all over the map here for Pittsburgh. And it's a bit of an interesting move, Kevin, because I said this on the podcast on Tuesday. I don't understand how he fits. He is not their wide receiver two answer after they traded George Pickens. They still need another wide receiver. Steelers did have the least amount of targets to their wide receivers last year in the NFL. So a lot of it's going to be fed through DK Metcalf. And they're probably going to play a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. I don't have any questions about that. But how does a 12 personnel of Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth work? Right? Neither of them are great blockers. Freiermuth's better than Jonnu, but Jonnu's more of like a split out Y yak threat. He's kind of this carved out different weapon the Steelers didn't have. They were awful as a yak team last year. They needed yak. So Jonnu's going to help that. Their screen game, their quick game. He's going to be able to be explosive there. But how do you see this working out? Because it's a really good tight end room. Jonnu Smith, Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington. That's 1, 2, 3. Like you got three really good players. But how do you work this out to try and make this thing work? Because this is a tough thing to do as an OC, I think.
Yeah, this is one of the most difficult ones, and it's sort of the same problem, I think, to some degree, that Arthur Smith had in Atlanta with Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts. And Freiermuth is a better blocker than Kyle Pitts. I think most tight ends in this league are better blockers than Kyle Pitts. But you have a very similar issue of like your top two tight ends, your top two receiving threats at tight ends, they're not consistent blockers. They're not great blockers. And so you have to find ways to create the push elsewhere. And I think you almost have to just keep playing Darnell Washington more because like I look at what Jonnu Smith does, and you mentioned it, right? Like he's a great yak threat. He's one of the best yak threat tight ends in football, and he was huge for Miami last year in terms of opening stuff in the middle, quick game part of the field, which they struggled with at tight end, but they also struggled blocking because they didn't have a tight end who could block consistently. And like I think that when you have a guy like Jonnu Smith, he's a guy you have to sort of generate touches for, and you have to find ways to get him the ball and get him moving. And Miami did a great job of that, but for a team like Pittsburgh, who has DK Metcalf, who has Pratt Freiermuth, who is a good receiver, maybe not a consistent blocker, right? Like I just don't see how this works, and I don't get paid to figure out how this works. So I'm sure Arthur Smith has a better plan than I do sitting in my room, but like. I think to some degree, like this is the biggest question mark of the deal for Pittsburgh. It's because I look at Jonnu Smith and I think he's sort of redundant in this offense. And he's a guy who fits a lot of the same stuff that you would kind of want Freiermuth to do. You would kind of want other guys to do. And he's probably better at it than a replacement level player. He's certainly more athletic. He's certainly more of a big play threat, but you don't get a lot else in terms of blocking. And if you want to try and establish the run at all, good luck, man. Because I don't know if you can do it with Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith there. Because I mean, Jonnu Smith struggled at blocking last year. And I think that's a big reason why Miami was sort of like, yeah, you can go. We'll find your replacement. We can find someone to do that yak underneath stuff, and we'll go a little bit more 11 and 12 big personnel with blocking tight ends. And it's going to be interesting to see how it works in Pittsburgh when you don't have a very consistent blocker at tight end.
It's fascinating because Darnell is that consistent blocker, right? And so you're cutting into Frymuth's snaps when I think Frymuth is so underrated. I really do. I think he wasn't maximized last year in the offense. I thought he was open so much more than his numbers indicate. I thought he was really good last year. And so I think Aaron Rodgers with Pat Freiermuth like made all the sense in the world. Like those two are gonna melt together. I also think Aaron Rodgers and Jonnu Smith make a lot of sense, right? Like it does fit. It finding the snaps. I do wonder if in 13 personnel we almost see it work as like a weird 12 personnel with this group because I think they'd be better off splitting Jonnu out in 13 personnel than maybe even, loading it to one side where you have two guys and one guy here and doing these shifts. It's almost like, do you kind of go out there and essentially make Jonnu Smith a Z receiver in some respects? Like, is that the vision? Because I don't see how you can run 12 personnel with Jonnu and Muth consistently, or 13 personnel with Jonnu in line with his hand in the dirt even next to Darnell Washington. You got to make sure that this run game is consistent. Otherwise, you're going to put so much pressure on Aaron Rodgers, who's 41 years old. The whole kind of vision of the offense, Kevin, to me is they added another really good talent in Jonnu Smith, but it feels like you're just adding talent. And I understand that they needed talent at their weapons. They needed it. But this fit is so odd. And it's so hard to run the ball out of 12 personnel. In fact, I'll say this. I think 12 personnel when both your tight ends can't block is maybe the worst personnel grouping in football.
It's just not effective.
Right.
It's never
It's not.
effective.
Johnny Smith played 55% of the snaps last year for Miami because Julian Hill and Durham Smythe were taking legitimate snaps because they could block. So I guess one of my ideas, let's try and brainstorm this because I think all we've done is criticize this and kind of question the fit. If we're thinking about how you would use this, if you want to use Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith together in 12 personnel, if you want that 13 personnel with Smith, Freiermuth, and Washington, how does this work? I think one of them is splitting Jonnu out and having him stock block safeties. I think maybe you can trust him to do that, but it puts a lot more pressure on Freiermuth to take a leap as a blocker on the inline part of this. He did improve last year. I think he had his best year as a blocker in the NFL. That was a good sign. I believe his uncle was an offensive line coach that he's working with off to the side. So there's some things there with Freiermuth that maybe there's more blocking upside you can tap into with Pat. If that happens, I think this changes kind of my perspective of this deal. But just let's assume Pat Freiermuth stays at the same level blocker, which is average to slightly below average, which is where he's at. How would you go about using Jonnu Smith in a 13 personnel or 12 personnel with Freiermuth on the field?
So I think if you're going 12 personnel with Jonnu Smith and Freiermuth, your wide receiver two has to be a good blocker. That's like almost a non-negotiable at this point. And you can find good blocking wide receivers. That's like a thing that you can typically find and just have a guy who's a solid receiver, and that may all be all Pittsburgh needs. I still think the thing you need to do is start sending Jonnu Smith in motion, have him line up offset and start getting him moving. And whether it's just to take the focus from the linebackers away, add the little eye candy of like, well, this guy's moving, you have to pay attention to him. But like, you can't have him line up in line and expect him to block consistently. He's going to get blown up. Now, I will say, right, like I think maybe it's a little bit more effective if you put him as a big slot, and maybe you have him sort of move around like that, and effectively say like, hey, we may be giving up a little bit of the run blocking stuff early on, but we'll get another dynamic threat for Aaron Rodgers. We'll get another underneath threat that Rodgers can trust, which likely opens up a little bit more for DK down the field. If you go 13 personnel, I think you can effectively maximize it with how aggressive Darnell Washington is. And that's the thing to me that just continually stands out is like, if Darnell Washington is on the field, I feel comfortable with Darnell Washington's blocking, Farmouth's like average-ish blocking, and Jonnu Smith being the offset move tight end that you send in motion. You have him run those little flat routes or those, you design screen touches for him, right? Like you do a lot of the stuff that Arthur Smith did in Atlanta with him. I just think it's the biggest question is who's playing as the wide receiver two in this offense, and is it going to be someone who's a blocker who you can trust to block, or is it going to be to try and get more talent on the field? Because if it's the latter, you're going to struggle, and you're going to have to trust that your offensive line carries a lot of that load. But if you get a guy who's an aggressive blocker who can just block consistently, you open up a little bit more of what Jonnu Smith can do as a receiving threat, which likely is what Pittsburgh just needs from him. And I think that was the goal is like, hey, we'll figure out the blocking stuff later. If we have to add someone, we'll add someone. If we have to change the way we play offense, we will change the way we play offense. But we desperately need a dynamic underneath yak threat. And that's what he is. And I think he'll still have a productive year receiving wise. I just think you need to have protection for him in terms of a wide receiver who can block or embracing 22 personnel with a fullback or playing with 13 personnel with Darnell Washington and just effectively saying like, hey, we're going to hope that the defenses go big. Because if you have defenses go big, that's where DK does well. That's where Jonnu Smith does well. And now we'll see how teams end up defending Jonnu Smith. I think a lot of teams last year just ended up putting a safety on him and said, we're not going to go big because you're going 12 personnel. But it can be effective and it can work. And I think it will work to some degree. It's just, I kind of need to see proof of concept early on.
Right. And Arthur Smith, we'll see. Arthur Smith, we'll see. I have my criticisms of him. But I will say, we talk about blockers, and certainly Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson don't fit into these archetypes. They're slot receivers in 11 personnel that are going to be those types of field stretchers that when they spread them out, because Rodgers, I do think this is another thing about Johnny Smith is when they spread them out and go 11 and they spread into empty and stuff, because Rodgers loves to do that. He will be very good in that area of the field, just spreading out into empty and things like that. But one thing I thought about when you were saying blocking wide receiver, and a really good blocking wide receiver is still a free agent, and he took a visit to Pittsburgh. I mean, Gabe Davis certainly fits the mold.
I think that's the perfect wide receiver two in this offense. And now that you mentioned that name again, because I remember seeing that and sort of scoffing at it and go, why would you want Gabe Davis? Then I realize they don't have another wide receiver who's willing to get dirty in the run game, who's willing to put his nose down and try and seal or try and do the stuff that a tight end or a wide receiver needs to do in the run game. And that may be the most perfect thing for this offense because I think that opens up the Jonnu Smith underneath yak stuff, takes a little bit less stress on him to block, and it gives you a little bit more of that consistent blocking. And then you know what? If you want to go with 12 personnel with like Jonnu or and Darnell Washington or Fryermuth and Darnell Washington, now you have two really solid blockers out there in Gabe Davis and Darnell Washington. And it just continually opens up how you can play this offense, which if I was Arthur Smith, if I was Mike Tomlin, I'd get him on the phone today. I'd be like, hey, you know what? Like this is perfect. Like let's get you in before training camp. And then that gives Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson the chance to just be gadget slot guys who you get the ball in their hands, you let them make plays. And I think that just fully opens up everything for Jonnu Smith, for Fryermuth, for this offense. And I think I'm glad you mentioned the empty stuff because that's where Jonnu Smith is going to get paid this year. Is like the underneath stuff in empty where you have him running on drags, you have him running on slants, just the quick stuff to get the ball in his hands. He's a threat to take it 30, 40 yards down the field. He did it a lot in Miami. And I see the vision with Jonnu Smith. It feels like there's another corresponding move that will open everything up. And if it's Gabe Davis, I think that's perfect. But there is certainly probably one more move that opens up everything for Jonnu Smith and Pratt Freiermuth.
I guess if they don't make a move, we're gonna be running 45 Robert Woods snaps a game. I guess. I mean, Ben Skowronek. I mean, I love Benny Sko, but
Bring him in, baby. Let's do it.
yeah, man. I mean, I like Ben Skowronek, but I wouldn't play him that much. I think Gabe Davis fits well, and on top of that, Gabe Davis can stretch the field vertically, so you can help DK underneath. And there's a lot of things. I do think one thing they got with Jonnu was, and the one thing I had been asking for all offseason, I thought it was going to be a receiver, but it's actually a tight end in this case. Every time Aaron Rodgers is really good, he has a quick winner. It's Randall Cobb, it's Jordy Nelson, it's Devontae, it's Greg Jennings. Like, just go through his career. There's quick winner underneath winners. It's Jonnu. Like, it was going to be Muth, and now it's Jonnu. Like, that's who it's going to be. I think Aaron Rodgers, one thing I will say, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to absolutely love Jonnu Smith. I have
Yeah, I mean he will have a field day drawing stuff up for Jonnu Smith and going, "Hey man, just get open." Because that's what like Jonnu Smith did a lot for Tua last year, and it helped Tua because when teams wanted to go, with the cover two and the cover four, just effectively say like, "Hey, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle won't beat us." The issue 2 years ago was no one else could beat you, and it was Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Oh crap, we don't have anyone else who can beat you. Last year was like, okay, well, Jonnu Smith is probably going to be open. Let's just get him moving, get him open, and have him make a play. And there were a lot of times last year where it was like he was effectively the get out free card, the get out of jail free card. It was like nothing else is open. F it, Jonnu Smith is open. And that's where I think a lot of the similar things in terms of how Aaron Rodgers and Tua plays with the fact that they want to get the ball out quickly. They just want to let their guys play. It's like that's where I think Jonnu Smith is going to elevate this offense to another level, especially if you can get a guy in like Gabe Davis or if Robert Woods has some career renaissance year and is now suddenly like a really good player again. Have someone who's a consistent blocker. Suddenly, Jonnu Smith can just do the stuff that he's really good at, and Aaron Rodgers has a guy who, as you mentioned, because he didn't have it last year a lot in New York, because Garrett Wilson wasn't that for him, and they didn't have a tight end who was consistent. The quick winner, the guy who just gets the easy yards and keeps the offense on schedule. That's what Jonnu Smith, that's what Pat Freiermuth does do at a high level, and I think that's where the offense is going to have a little bit more personality than it probably did last year.
It will. I think it's going to have more consistent peaks than it did last year. I do. I also think they have a chance to have this run game work a little better. I think Caleb Johnson adds an efficiency part of that to the wide zone scheme that they can get. None of this really works without the offensive line being good, which is like the one thing I keep mentioning to everybody's like Broderick Jones, Troy Fautanu, you two focus on them because they are huge X factors, I think. But I really like Jonnu Smith's. Like when we talk through it, like I see it, but it's about trusting Arthur Smith to put that in action.
Yeah, now the biggest question mark is
Right.
what does it look like when you line up in preseason game two or regular season week one? Like, what does this look like? Because it's one thing to say it looks good on paper, but now I have to see what Arthur Smith does because it was not too long ago where he had two tight ends who couldn't really block in Atlanta, and it just didn't look effective all the time. And so we'll see if maybe that was a quarterback issue, which Aaron Rodgers should help the quarterback issue, or if it was just the way the offense worked. It's going to be very interesting to see how that looks like when the season starts.
Right, and that Atlanta team didn't have a wide receiver too. They had Drake London, but they did not have a wide receiver too. The Steelers are in the same boat. They have DK, and he can be really good, but they need another guy there. They need another XZ big body type, and I think Gabe Davis fits it absolutely
Yeah,
perfect.
he's the perfect fit for what they probably want out of a wide
He
receiver
really
right now.
is. And I think they can get him for the minimum because he's getting paid like $12 million from Jacksonville right now. So he's probably going to be a vetman signing, and it'll be that. So I mean, I call Gabe Davis as long as the knee's good. That's that's what I would do. One last question for you, Kevin. What's your expectations for Minkah in Miami? How do you feel about Minkah coming over? I know the Dolphins DB room is just an absolute disaster, to be quite honest with you, especially outside corner. But Minkah at least should give them a nice canopy back there as a really rangy free safety still.
Yeah, I think that's probably what he's gonna do, right? Is just a lot of the range stuff, let him make plays back there and they have guys who can play at the line of scrimmage. They have guys who can play in the box. They have a slot corner who's really effective in Gator Koku. They need someone back there who can just be consistent. And before this trade, they had a Fatu Melifonwu, who I love, and I think he's a very talented player and should have another good year. And then you had Ashton Davis, who Ashton Davis is a safety three in the NFL. He will always probably be a safety three in the NFL. And so I think what they're doing is effectively trading the production at corner, and they're thinking that if the pass rush, if the safeties can play well, they can get away with a inconsistent cornerback room. And the biggest question mark is who are your two corners this year outside because you don't have anyone from last year who started, right? You have Storm Duck who was inconsistent, and you have Artie Burns, who was like a cornerback four in Seattle. And then you have a bunch of guys who didn't play last year. And so, much like we feel like there's probably a move for Pittsburgh, there's probably a move for Miami at corner. But I think what you get with Minkah is a more consistent Javon Holland for this defense, and more consistent in the sense that he's going to play that deep, rangy stuff a little bit more consistently. He's going to be able to do it at a high level. He's not going to be an all-pro anymore, but like it would not shock me if a year from now we're talking about Minkah Fitzpatrick sort of returning to a form that we expect from him because of what he can do in an Anthony Weaver sort of Mike McDonald type defense. I love the fit. And it's a little weird because he, of course, asked out of Miami under Brian Flores and did not want to play slot corner. And so, really funny that he's coming back, but I do think he'll do well here. The biggest question mark is, does it matter because you have you and I playing cornerback for them,
Yeah.
and you have no one who's like a consistent corner because to some degree, you still need consistent cornerback play. You may not need high level cornerback play, but you still need someone who can be an adult in that
Oh, he's no stranger to bad corner play. Trust me. Levi
room.
Wallace, the fossil, Patrick Peterson, Dante Jackson. It's been a rough go of things in Pittsburgh over the last few years. So Minka's used to it.
Levi Wallace may unironically be the second best cornerback on Miami next year if they signed him. So,
Honestly, dude, it's wild. Artie Burns was also a great shout. Former Steeler, way back when. Everyone loves Artie Burns. Good for him, man. He's had like this is gonna be like his 10th, 11th year in the NFL. I mean, good for
yeah, he's carved a role as a special teamer, and now he might have to actually play cornerback again. So,
Hey, gets to return home to Miami. Good for him, man. So yeah, this was a great episode, Kevin, discussing Jonnu and kind of Jalen Ramsey and how they fit into this defense and offense. But tell people where they can follow you, read your work, listen to you, all that great stuff.
yeah, the best places is on Blue Sky and Twitter. It's really the only two social media apps I use consistently, I'll be honest. My Twitter is at the Kevin Fielder, and my Blue Sky is actually the same. I realized that I was able to get those to mix, so it's just at the Kevin Fielder on both Blue Sky and Twitter. That's the best place to find me. That's where you'll find all of my opinions, and on Dolphins game days, me yelling at a TV screen because I don't like what Mike McDaniel is doing with the offense.
There you go. Folks, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. You can follow me on Twitter, Farabaugh FB, Blue Sky Nick Farabaugh. Follow me on Instagram, Steel City Farabaugh. So I am all over the map on these social media apps. Read the Steelers stuff, penlive.com/Steelers. Everybody, thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow.